This not-so-ordinary guy Lee Ju-won has the ability to copy other people's identity. But it all takes a turn when this guy, the #1 ranked hunter in Korea, asks him to become his doppelganger. Not only can he look like him, but he suddenly gets his powers. Now let's start the recap. Hero. A hero is somebody who possesses powers that transcends humans. We see a hand lifting up a ball of light, and then we see a zesty Jiren-looking dude with a mask on looking like Bane. But this guy is super buff. We also see a guy that seems to be in some sort of tracksuit wearing a bicycle helmet. The big dude is about to swing his fist at this guy, but then it is also said that heroes go head-to-head against villains. Obviously, I think we all knew this. He punches Jiren, or whatever that guy is, and he gets sent flying, and we see the flame punch that was just thrown at him. This bicycle guy, or bicycle helmet guy, looks pretty cool, and the crowd goes absolutely wild. He opens up some of the mask and we see him sweating. And then the scene switches to somebody watching him on the phone with a girl that has blonde hair beside him. He says that that is why he is a hero. And also because he defeated the monster in just one blow. The guy with the bowl cut takes a closer look, but then he asks, doesn't that look like Kim Sun-woo? And we see a guy with orange hair, drunk and dazed, out on the table. He says he can barely move because he feels like puking, and he asks him, how could he be there? The bowl cut guy is like, of course, and the girl with pigtails beside him just laughs. Just at that moment, the orange-haired guy seems to have got a notification from his phone. He says that he's going to be going to the restroom, and they say, all right. As he is walking, we see more drunk people in the area, but he opens his phone, and it says that the hero that has disappeared suddenly after saving the citizens. He opens up the bathroom door, and then closes it and locks it shut. He says to his phone, I'm here. And just at that moment, the black motorcycle rider arrives looking like Spider-Man in that pose. Sun-woo says, how could you come in there with the helmet on? And that if they got caught, they would both be in trouble. He says to stop fussing so much, and then he says what's inside the helmet is hotter. But then it seems that these guys look the exact same. So I don't know who is who. The guy that was wearing the outfit says, there's nothing more eye-catching than a sudden, revealing, mysterious hero. And then he asks Kim Sun-woo, don't you know about that? He says, Lee Ju-woon, which is actually the name of Kim Sun-woo, to transform into his original form once again. He also says that seeing him with his own face gives Sun-woo his creeps. Just realize this guy sounds like Jung Sin-woo, but I guess it's a combination of Sung Jin-woo's name. Anyway, he breathes out, and then just at that moment, he transforms back into his original state, and he has black hair instead of orange. Sun-woo says that it's disgusting that he's able to copy somebody's appearance just like that. He then squeezes his cheeks and says, you didn't take the girls away, did you? And he also said that the stuff today was kind of good. And then he said of course he didn't, and that this is his first time while he breaks a sweat. And then after that, they begin to change into their regular clothes. He says to make sure to iron the suit well, and then he says, great work today. Ju-woo says, is he a hero or is he just a punk? He puts on his cap, and then we find out some of his story. He is a superhero, and he also says that having a superpower doesn't mean that just anyone can be a hero. And he actually lives as the normal life doppelganger to heroes. So he is the one pretending to be the hero while they go and save the day. About 20 years ago, people with superpowers began appearing on Earth, and the world fell into chaos. We can see some of the buildings catching on fire,
and smoke emerging from out of them. We also see some people who look evil, and we see some wannabe punk rock star with chains on his neck, and he is carrying a car right in front of him. The police try to shoot him, but it literally just scrapes him. And they are like, did the bullets just bounce off of him? This came straight out of a movie or manhwa. Then we see the guy jump into the air, and he is carrying the car with his bare hands, and he is about to kill the police officer. We find out that in order to bring the order back to society, the government had enacted a new law that ability users who did not follow the law and chase their own benefit became villains. And the vigilante corps who stopped them became the heroes. We see the villain headquarters, and this honestly looks pretty cool even though they are villains. We then see the villain union leader, Nemesis, and he says that there's no point in a law such as a hero-villain act. The girl beside him also says that it's a joke. And then he mocks the police, saying, "Will the police come for us?" And he calls them morons. He takes a sip of his drink and says that in today's world, whoever believes in heroes, and just at that moment, somebody barges in, and this man is literally a Giga Chad Superman x Batman collaboration. And this man is ready to beat these dudes up. The other villains there laugh at him and make fun of him because of the tights he's wearing. And they even say, "What an awesome concept, dude." But then the man says, "Nemesis, under the jurisdiction of the hero-villain law, Section 1, that Nemesis will be punished." And he points at him. And this is actually such an intimidating picture. We then see him just look down as his hands are still wrapped around the girl, and he has his drink on the other. He then starts to transform, and we see the purple aura start to overfill within him, and he becomes a demon with 2 horns on his head. He says, "How dare he spew that type of nonsense at him?" And he leaps towards the hero with his purple aura-infested claws. But the man just stands there so giga-chaddily, if that even is a word. He loads up lightning in his fist and punches him with an uppercut. And boom! The man literally gets sent flying. And Nemesis has an entire fist print in the center of his torso. And he asks, "Who are you supposed to be?" And he says, "I'm Justice, a hero." And we see lightning come out from his eyes. That was honestly so hype. That was reminding me of Batman when he called himself Vengeance. The scene then switches back to Ju-woon, and his hand seems to be retransforming. He says that he couldn't fight villains face to face. And he says that there are guys out there who are heroes and living their life to the fullest. And he says this while he's taking off the cap and his shoes. We see his calendar, and it seems to be that he has some things to do. He is grateful, however, and he does say that at least he has a way of using his ability, even though it's illegal. He brings out an envelope, and this man is counting up the bands. He says, "You guys can go do that hero stuff." And in the end, they're just doing it for the money. He lies down on his bed and says that he will work like hell and retire at the age of 50. Someone thuds on his door, and he looks annoyed but gets up and says that he's coming. He opens the door, and it is literally Justice, the guy from earlier. And our boy is literally too stunned to speak, and he has tears and sweat going from his face. Justice asks, "Are you Lee Ju-woon?" And then he says that you're illegally acting as the heroes in their normal lives, aren't you? And then Ju-woon is like, how the heck does he already know? He starts to think if he should run away, and he says that there's no chance because his opponent is literally Justice. Then just at that moment, Justice says he is here to hire him as his normal life substitute. And he points at him like, bro, you have got to be kidding me. He said that he knows he's not supposed to ask personal questions, and he is like, you're right. But then Justice brings out a suitcase and says that he has brought everything that he will need. He says that there's no photo of actually him there without his mask. And then he takes off his mask, and our boy literally looks like a beautiful Giga Chad created by God himself. Also known as, he just looks the same as any of us. Ju-hoon asks, when should I start? And then Justice says, tomorrow. And he also hands him a card and tells him to come to the address written on there. He leaves, but then Ju-won chases after him and says, wait. But just at that moment, the man had just disappeared. Just like Batman. We then see a literal 50-story building, and then Ju-woon is like, this thing is literally ginormous. He checks the cards and makes sure he's at the right place. And then he remembers Justice, and that he was the one who protects the citizens at the forefront. And now, he is the direct opposite. He is confused as to why Justice is hiring him, and he says that he cannot let go of a big fish like Justice. He walks in and says, excuse me. And then we see Justice all alone in this huge flat, and the man is just sitting on a couch all alone. He tells him, let's go down to business. And then he starts to bring something out of his tote bag. But then a horrific image is displayed, and Justice seems to have been killed. Ju-woon is literally shocked by this, and he goes to touch him to check if he is okay. But just at that moment, lightning flashes and emerges from his body, and then his hand begins to transform. He screams and is like, what the heck just happened? He says that that's definitely the light that released his ability. And then he tells himself that he needs to get out of there. He runs down the stairs fast, and he says that he needs to quickly report this to the Heroes Association. He accidentally bumps into somebody and spills his coffee. And it is Sun Woo, and he asks why he is here. He calls him annoying, but he is still a top-grade hero. And so he starts to think of an idea. Sun Woo asks why he's holding his right arm like that. He is about to show him, but then it turns back to normal. Sun Woo then says, do you know how much this costs? And he says that even if he worked as a substitute his entire life. But just at that moment, they look behind each other. And then something starts coming after them. It seems to be some sort of purple aura or some purple fusion ball. It stabs Sun Woo and literally goes directly through his right abdomen. And he's like, what the heck? We then see some dude with 4 octopus-looking tentacles. And this man straight up looks like Dr. Doom. And he says that Sun Woo is all over the news, but it seems that he is just a kid. And then he thinks if he is the one who killed Justice, but because he uses tentacles, he says that he isn't. Sun Woo then powers up, and the flames release from his body. He dashes towards him and misses his attack, because the man jumps up into the air pretty quickly. He uses his tentacles to attack Sun Woo, but Sun Woo literally just scares it away with his flames. He jumps forward again, taking the offensive, but then he gets caught in the tentacles of the villain. He is suffocating Sun Woo and says that, do you really think I only had 4 tentacles? How immature. And this man is looking kind of sussy. Just at that moment, it seems that Sun Woo was caught and killed. The people watching are running away in fear of the sight. The villain drops him to the ground and says that he is now dead. And then he looks towards the others to find his next prey. The others are looking very, very nervous I mean, if I was in that condition, I would probably just fake die and hope that I wouldn't get attacked. He pulls everyone one by one, and they are all wrapped by his tentacles. Just at that moment, we see Ju-woon behind the desk and says that, come on, one more hero has to show up. And just at the moment, we also see a flyer on the ground of Justice and how he is a hero of the month. It's an ad that says, live safely with hero insurance with Justice. He looks to his left and he sees some workers there as well. They cry out and say that Justice will figure out this pretty soon. And then Ju-woon gets a flashback to Justice and says that he won't be able to go there. And he wonders if these people are going to die. He says there's nothing he can do because the opponent is a literal villain. And he also says to himself, I cannot fight, not even when he's pretending to be a hero, because this guy just seems to be too strong. He sees a little girl crying in a red dress, and then it catches the attention of the enemy. He tells the girl to run and screams. Just at that moment, the man says, where do you think you will run to? And he uses his tentacle to go and try to pierce her. It's about to eat her alive. But then Ju-woon steps in and grabs it. And something starts to happen. Lightning emerges from his body. And he transforms into Justice. He grabs a tentacle and protects the girl. And he is like, what the heck just happened? He said that the strength he feels in his arm is at a different level than back then. And he crushes the monster and rips away its tentacles with ease. And then he says, I don't know what's going on here, but he uses Justice's famous catchphrase and says, under the jurisdiction of the Hero-Villain Law Section 1, you shall be punished. And the light is literally glistening from this man's awesomeness. And the chapter comes to a Sigma male ending. I'm hyped to see what Ju-woon will do. They are standing across from each other, and there's a random dead guy on the ground. He says to himself, his whole body's overflowing with so much power that it's hard to handle it. And we see the green, blue lightning surrounding his body. He says that this is his first time going against the villain, and he wonders if he will be able to do it. The villain says nervously, don't you get excited. And then he regenerates his tentacle, and he says that he can do it as many times as he wants. He says that once he gets caught, he will be done for, just like that hero kid, and he was referring to Sun Woo. He launches his tentacles towards Justice, or our boy, Ju-won, and then, just at that moment, he is wondering why the tentacles are so slow. And then, he literally flash steps into in front of the enemy, and then punches him, and his face gets blown in. The villain jumps up and says that it's not over, but then he pulls his tentacle like he's pulling a rope behind him, and he smashes him against the wall. He says that it's crazy because he just lightly pushed him, and yet he flew all the way there. He looks at his hand and says that if he doesn't restrain his strength, something bad could really happen. The villain stands up and we see his little bald head, and then he chases after him. And then Ju-won says that now he can even fight against the villain. He loads up powers into his right fist, but then it seems that something has gone wrong. Our boy really thinks he is Deku. He says that it's the same as before, and that he can't actually control the transformation. The monster continues to chase after him, and boom, it gets hit with a Kamehameha, or with a final flash from Vegeta. It gets pushed against the wall, and it seems to pass out. And the villain incapacitated, and our boy Ju-won is like, what the heck? We see some footsteps approaching, and it seems to be a pink-haired girl that also seems to be a hero because she has her suit on. She goes up to Justice, or should I say Ju-won, and says, I knew you were coming, Mr. Justice. And she says that after all, he has amazing hearing and that he drew the villain's gaze towards him so that she could safely attack, didn't you? And then he says nervously, yeah. And she was like, as I thought. And in our head, or in his head, he says, anyhow, at least I survived. Because this girl doesn't even look like a hero. She continues to say, you're really fast just as the rumors. Because he was able to get there faster than them when they were literally right nearby. And just at the moment, the monster stands up and says, darn it. But then, boom, another blast goes right through his body. And the girl says, how dare a measly villain like him think that he can even get close to touching Mr. Justice? And just at that moment, Justice disappears. And she feels kind of down and wishes she got an autograph. Some lady behind her, seems to be some mysterious goth girl, says, come to your senses. And she says, do you not see the injured people? And she goes to help them. She has purple hair and she's also wearing a mask. And she says, Justice is alive? And we see the dude running away. And she catches him, our boy Ju-won, running outside. The scene switches back and it's Ju-won, and he says that there's so many of these, and it seems to be paper. The one that Justice gave him. He wonders what he should do now, because he just tore it to shreds and threw it in the garbage can. He thinks to himself, Justice is the #1 ranked hero, but that means that the villain who killed him was stronger than Justice himself. He scratches his head because he was so startled that he did not even think of transforming before he left, and he hopes nobody would have seen him. But then, some voice says, I did, and he looks back, confused. He says that destroying evidence using a shredder, she says that he must be quite thorough. And he asks, where are you? And then she says, below you. And boom, it is a girl from earlier, and she calls Ju-won noisy. It seems like she can live in the shadows. Shadow arms emerge from the shadows and grab the trash that he just threw. He then opens up the bag and we see the shreds go there. And then she makes it go back to the original form. How the heck did she just put the documents back to how it was? She says that now it is clear, and she asks Ju-won if he saw Justice dead. She says, I apologize, but knowing that he's about to be put in a difficult position. The hands try to attack him, but he leaps back, and he says to himself, this lady is really trying to kill me, isn't she? And he says that he has no choice now. He then transforms, and then he says that if she's the one who killed Justice, that he doesn't need to hold back. He says that he can't grab them like tentacles because they are from the shadow realm. But then he says that the strategy should be pretty similar to the one before. He dodges it like he did previously, and he says that he can just approach and come closer. But just at that moment, his leg begins to hurt, and he says that it's the same symptom and it's acting up again because he transformed so suddenly. She easily catches him off guard and says that he's just a worthless copycat. And she says, I wondered who is fearless enough to act as Justice. She is about to attack him while he's on the ground, but then he pulls out a stone, or he literally pulls out a rock from the ground. And then he blocks her attack, parries it, and then begins to run towards her. He says that she is fast, but nonetheless, as soon as she breaks the rock, he has an uppercut waiting for her. He punches, but then he barely misses her, and her mask seems to have been broken. And she says that she was flustered for a moment. He tries to get closer, but then his body won't even move. She says, you see, you're in my domain now. She really thinks she's Shikamaru and Gojo. And we see him literally getting wrapped around by the shadow just like Sunwoo got wrapped around by those tentacles. He says he can't breathe, and then the girl takes off her mask and she snaps, and it lets Ju-won go. He wonders why she let him go, and she says, "Do you have any plans to continue what you did before?" And she says, "Not the lame normal life doppelganger acting," but she asks him, "Will you become the substitute for Justice, the hero?" And our boy is right there getting his cheeks squished. And Ju-won is like, what is about to happen? Chapter 3 starts, and then we see that justice is the embodiment of all that heroes stand for, and that if news of his murder gets out, it's going to create a large-scale panic. So as the girl figures out the situation, she needs somebody who can buy her time. And Ju-won is like, wait, what? You were trying to kill me just now. What type of nonsense is this? And he asks for her identity. She says her name is Chrome, and she is a hero under the command of Justice. And he's like, you're a hero? And he seems kind of doubtful. She says, you can check. And she says that she is also mentioned in those documents. And he was like, is that true? He goes through it, and then we see her. And then Chrome says, she just wanted him to shut up. So she scared him a little, but she never planned on killing him. And she also says that if Ju-won agrees to become the substitute, the compensation will be a monthly payment of 100 million won. This makes our boy literally amazed and says that his current earnings don't even compare to this. And then he asks Chrome, how can I be the substitute? What if I get caught? She says, don't worry about that, and that she will help him to make sure that it doesn't happen. He then wonders, no matter which way I put it, and then she says, I'm not going to force you. But then she also says that if word gets out that Justice is dead, all the villains who've been quiet till now will start acting full scale. And we see some scary silhouettes of the villains she was talking about. She says that if they find out that the world's strongest hero is no longer alive, the villains will wage a war against the heroes, and that countless innocent people will be dragged into it as collateral damage. She then asks him, what do you think is the right choice for you? He then thinks to himself that she is right, because Justice's very presence guaranteed law and order. And then he starts to second guess himself, saying, can I really do what he did? He said he can't bear to see innocent people die ever again. He looks at his hand, and he seems to have gotten quite serious. Chrome then says, it seems like I've made an unreasonable request. And then she shouldn't have expected anything from Ju-won in the first place, and she tells him to not go around blabbering about Justice dying. He then says, wait, and then Chrome stops. Ju-won says that he became occupied with some calculations, considering compensation for risks, job security, and the confidentiality agreement. He says that 1 million won isn't enough, and he says 200 million should be fine. What do you think? And he says this with a smile on his face. Chrome then smirks and says, don't go back on your word later on. 1 week later, and then we see Ju-won's apartment, and it seems to me that he hasn't been getting any sleep. He says justice, justice, and that we see a large pile of paper on his desk, and he says that he's been hearing it now so much because he's read it a lot. He says that I guess I've memorized a lot of it, and then Chrome says, let's go. They're in the white car, and Chrome is literally driving, but not with her hands, but with the shadows she uses. Ju-won says, can I ask something about this? And she says, what is it? He says, apart from the villains, do we really need to hide Justice's murder from the heroes? Shouldn't the higher authorities know about this? She said that that's how it should usually be, but that can never happen again. And Ju-won looks at her, kind of confused. The car stops and she says that you will know once you see it for yourself. She shuts the door closed, and they arrive at the logistics delivery center. He asks her, why are they here? And she says, yeah, you are right. This is the delivery distribution center. If you look from the outside, we see a camera there and she shows her ID. And then the door opens. And she says that in reality, this is a headquarters for heroes. We then see a mighty statue of gold of justice, as well as a ton of heroes there as well. An atrium. That is what this place is called. She says goods move in and out of the delivery center all the time, so it really is kind of easy to hide in there. And we see a bunch of heroes around them as they walk. Let's see. We see some dude that looks like he's straight out of a Gundam or a Yu-Gi-Oh series. We see some guy with wings. We see some lizard guy, Swamp Thing, and we see some diamond guy. He says to himself, there are so many heroes. And then they arrive at their destination. She says that they're just there to look around, so they shouldn't attract any attention. Our boy Ju-won is then sweating and says that this is a place where heroes have meetings. And then we see a girl with pink hair with a teddy bear, a guy with green hair that seems to be a cyborg, some very charismatic white-haired guy, and then some Giga Chad with a suit and a beard. She says that these are the members of the 4 hero teams. And then we see a lady with a katana with blue hair, a guy with long bangs, headphones on, and a lady cyborg that seems to be surrounded by a speaker. The lady with the katana and blue hair says, why is it our fault that villains are becoming more active? And her name is Haste. She is the second in command of the Guardians. The man that looks like a Giga Chad says, that's because the number of incidents skyrocketed in your zone, lady. And he is the first in command of Ubermensch, and his name is Triumph. He says that the number of incidents in our zone did increase, and so it actually decreased. And then he says, you must just be bad at your job. And then Haste says, that's because you're taking all the personnel. And then Nivelle, the charismatic looking guy, says, isn't it obvious to invest in the money-making part? And that they pay for a lot of it, from the operation costs of Atrium to his paycheck. But then Arcadia, the guy with headphones, says that in fact, it's weirder to give everyone equal opportunities. Ju-won wonders if this is really a meeting of the representatives of the heroes, because it looks like a complete disaster. Zeus, the guy that looks like a cyborg with green hair, asks, where is Justice? And he says that it's already been 1 week. We then see Pandora, and she's second in command of El Condor, and she is the one with the little teddy bear. Just at that moment, the charismatic says, maybe the rumor that he's dead is true. And then Haste's hand slams on the table and says, just because you have a mouth doesn't mean you need to spew such nonsense. And she releases some of her aura. And the same way, Nivelle unleashes his power on his right arm. He says, without justice, haste is nothing, don't you know? And then the lady with the speaker, her name is Banshee, says, quiet. And then she thinks to herself, why are they always like this? She seems to have been fed up. She says that they can't just ignore the fact that Justice hasn't been seen for a week, and at this point, they might consider that he is in danger. They go and call Chrome and say, didn't Justice contact you? And then Chrome responds, well, he did tell me he'd be away for a while, but still. And then Pandora says that that's a lie. She says, because Justice hasn't shown up for a while, she went to his penthouse, and there was blood all over. Chrome is like, wait, you just trespassed into Justice's private property. And then Zeus asks, is that true? And then she says that this is bad, and that if Pandora, the little kid, saw the crime scene, then she can't lie. And just at that moment, Justice walks in, and it's her boy, Ju-won. And he says, it's true. He says sorry for being absent for so long, and then he says that he will explain everything. All the members are looking at him, and then he says that he will fool each and every one of them. The chapter comes to a close.
The chapter starts and all of the heroes are on the table chattering. Ju-won says, who knew that heroes were people like this? And he says that they're completely different from their social presence. He then says, at least there won't be any trouble. And unfortunately, that's a lie. And then Ju-won is like, wait, what? The little girl says, there was blood all over the place. And then the cyborg asks, Chrome, is this true? Chrome doesn't know what to say. And Ju-won is just looking from behind the door. He says the atmosphere has taken a wrong turn and they're all talking about it. And so there's no way that they will believe Chrome anymore, because honestly, I think she's stuck in this huge predicament. He then has his fist start to light up and it starts to vibrate. And just at that moment, Trium asks Chrome, don't tell me. And then it's true. We see our boy Ju-won and he is Justice. And he says, yes, it is true, as he walks in like a Sigma male. Arcadia puts away one of his headphones and says, he looks like he's okay though. And our boy looks pretty much like me because I always have headphones on. Chrome is like, wait, what is that? Because she did not expect it. She says in her head, what is this idiot doing right now? And those annoying questions might have stopped, but one mistake and this could really blow his cover. And Justice is just there, looking really calm. He says to himself, this is at a huge scale, and he wonders if there were always so many heroes, and he says he was getting a bit nervous. He continues to walk, and then he says, it's no big deal, you know why? Because I'm already used to deceiving other people. I mean, our boy has literally pretended to be so many other heroes already. We then see him on his laptop, and he is watching Justice and his videos to copy his characteristics. He does the stride, the tone of voice, and then he says, I'm sorry for being absent for so long. He even got the posture down as he puts his hands on the table. He says to himself, this is all perfectly flawless. Nivelle is like, I don't know why you're so confident, even though you're so late. And then he is like, try explaining it to all of us, right? And he asks, why was your penthouse in that state? And where the heck were you in that meantime? Ju-won says, they already know about the crime scene. And so he says, there was an assassination attempt against me. And the entire table faces him, and they are shocked. Everybody is like, really? And they cannot really believe it. And then Haste is like, Nani, what the heck did you just say? She says, how come you were quiet about this and you didn't even tell me? And then Justice said that he had to be careful with his movements. He also says, considering the situation, Chrome and I had to investigate it all secretly. Justice says, though I cannot tell you anything else because it's classified, he assures them that there will be clues coming up. And Justice is good, and he is happy and satisfied that everybody's talking about it. Justice then asks, Pandora? She's like, yeah. He gives a menacing look and says, who told you it was okay to enter my house? Our boy really is playing the part. She then hugs her bear harder, and she says, I was just worried, so I had to do it. Ju-won then says, or Justice. He says because he was forced to go public with the assassination, this investigation will go even harder, as he gives a sigh, and Pandora is starting to cry as well as her teddy bear, and she says, sorry, I made a mistake. Justice then says, your sloppy judgment is disappointing. And then Ju-won says, this bothers him a bit because it feels like he's just scolding a child. And then he tells us that this should be enough to stop the discussion. After that, Trium says, it's hard to believe that there would be an assassination attempt against you. And then he also mentions that an incident occurred in the middle of the city and nobody knew. He then gives a bluffy face and says, first we need to check the assassination and see if it was truly an attempt. And he says it could be all your plan anyway. Our boy really is questioning Justice. Justice is like, what? And then Pandora is like, why would Justice lie? And she calls Trium an old man. And then Pandora says, you're way too soft-hearted. She says that he is too wary of civilians, and that's why the villains keep getting away as she looks at him with a killer stare. She says that we should just kill all of them, and she wonders if we will save more people that way. And this little girl isn't as nice as she looks. And Zeus says that she is right. How long will the hero keep running around just to save 1 or 2 lives? And they truly are underestimating the value of one's life. Justice is like, what the heck do they mean? Because he knew that they don't have the best relationship with each other, but they are all trying to bite each other's head off. And it looks like they're all enemies. Arcadia says, wait, if Justice feels the need to tell us this, then there really must be a bigger reason. And he says also, there is a huge thing going on today, so they should just move on and accept it for now. We see one side of the table, and they just sigh, and they're like, fine. And of course, Pandora and Trio just look pretty pissed off. We then see the other heroes, and they're like, okay as well. Ju-won is like, are you kidding me? Why are the heroes like this? We then see the Rolls Royce they are in, and then Ju-won says that he is so tired. Chrome hands him a drink and tells him good work. Although she says, except for the sudden plot development, cause yeah, there literally is a whole nother plot now. He says it's better than them finding out Justice is truly dead. And then Ju-won asks, why are they so aggressive towards Justice? And then Chrome says, it's been like that for way too long, and they really stopped trying to understand each other now, which is kind of sad, considering they are supposed to be heroes. She says, the civilians that are being protected by the Guardians. And then we see Justice and Haste. We then see the extremists who aim to annihilate villains, the Corpse Sweepers, also known as El Condor. We have the supremacists who believe they are the chosen heroes, Surpassers, Ubermensch. And then we also have the Chasers who prioritize their own benefit, the Association, and they're called Union. And it is where the guy with the headphones and the girl with the speakers are a part of. Man looks up and then he says, in the end, heroes are just like politicians, right? And he says, by the way, what type of hero is Haste? Chrome says she is second in command to the Guardians, and she is a really skilled fighter. And she also says she's the most loyal to Justice. Ju-won has his drink in his hand, and then he says, when he revealed there was an assassination attempt against me, and we see her. He says she acts surprised on the outside, but her expression said something else. And then Ju-won points to his eye and says, because my abilities are about copying somebody's looks and appearances, he's very sensitive and alert, and that's why he's able to notice these subtle signs. Chrome says, don't tell me, and she thinks that she might know that it was a lie. And then Ju-won says, I'm just saying, we might not ever know about it. And just like that, the car stops. And she says, it seems that we have arrived. Come on out now. And then Ju-won is like, come on out where exactly? Chrome is outside the car and she says, you know the villains have been the weaker ones ever since Justice appeared, right? And even after that, all these heroes are still trying to suppress them. And they really just want to put an end to it now. And then we call it the Operation Annihilation. We then see the city, and it is literally in flames and in chaos. She says, all hero groups under the Guardians are participating. And then Ju-won starts to ponder. And then Chrome says, yeah, Justice needs to show up. As we see the city in ruin, right above or over the cliff. She says Justice needs to show up. And Ju-won is like, what the heck do you mean? She says after Justice appeared, villain forces have literally become non-existent, and that they are going to do a sweep over on one of their bases. She then explains it, and we see a map. She says the Guardians, Ubermensch, El Condor, and the Union are all going to enter from the different directions. And then she says that he needs to be the first one to arrive at the center, because our boy is Justice. She says, report back to me using this, and she gives him a sort of earpiece. Ju-won then asks, how can I start suddenly fighting against evil villains? And then he says, on top of that, I need to be there first? That is absolutely impossible. And you said that you'd support me so that I would not get caught. Chrome then says, well, do you want the 200 million won or not? And she also says, Justice is a number one ranked hero. If Ju-won cannot show the results in a fairly one-sided fight like this, that means that his cover will be blown relatively soon. Ju-won is kind of spooked, and then he says, 200 million won really isn't pocket change, so he has to do his best. Chrome then hands him the earpiece, and he turns into Justice. He also says, this will be a dangerous task, so he hopes he gets a bonus. He then sprints away and says, let's do this. He jumps down the cliff, and then he said that I'm not letting go of a single penny from the 200 million won. We then see the city in chaos, and we see heroes of each different organization fighting enemies. And then somebody uses a Kamehameha or a Final Flash and blasts off the head of this Cyclops. Ju-won or Justice is like, this is really a completely one-sided fight. And then Chrome says, that's because the count of heroes deployed is way too high. Just as Justice is standing down, he says there's nothing for him to do. And then a pink-haired girl appears behind him. She says, nice to meet you again. And then Ju-won says that I saw you at the penthouse. She then says, I heard somebody try to kill you. And she says, how's there somebody try to do something so corrupt? And Ju-won in his head is like, this girl must be a literally super fan. She then says, you gotta crush and find them. But something approaches him. And boom, something is right behind Justice and is about to claw over his head. Just at that moment, Justice punches him and he gets rolling in the air and then he crashes to the ground. Ju-won then says he was scared because the transformation might be lifted, so he had to barely use 1/4 of his strength, and he wonders if it is enough for small fries. And the enemy is literally on the ground dead. He asks what the girl's name is, and she says Max Ray. And then he just sprints away and says, let's chat next time, Max Ray. As he is running, there are two enemies in front of him, and he just blocks it with ease. And he just tackles them, not even breaking a sweat. Somebody's about to launch a fireball, but he easily just kicks the ground and blocks the fire attack with the piece of stone that emerged after he stomped on the ground. He then punches a stone wall, and then it launches towards the villain, and it's already knocked out. Ju-won then gets a flashback and says, when his little sister was in the hands of a villain, he felt so pathetic because he couldn't do anything about it. And we see the sister about to get gobbled up. He then looks at his hand and says, I didn't know I could copy a dying hero's powers. And then he says, if he had this power before, he could have saved his family. And then we see his family on the table, and they are celebrating a birthday. But that was in the past. Are you okay? He snaps back into reality, and he says, yeah. Chrome then says, you'll be left behind if you keep spacing out. Ju-won then says, right, so now I have to use this power. And he does a super run, and he literally goes faster than the speed of sound. And he says he has to go help the other powerless people. He sprints right through two enemies hiding behind some stone walls. And then they say, wasn't that Justice? We need to chase it. But then the girl says, it's no use, because that guy's already at a place where he's headed. We then see him, and he's headed towards the park. But then we see a spear, and it stops him right in his tracks. That was pretty close. We then see somebody wearing a gold helmet, and he says justice really has come. This is definitely an honor. Chrome says, dang it, don't tell me it's Caesar. And then he asks why. Is that a problem? We then are introduced to Caesar, and he is famous among the villains. He looks pretty dangerous, and then he says he goes around killing heroes just for fun, and he has already killed dozens of them. This guy sounds pretty menacing to me. Chrome says that he's too strong as an opponent for you, and that if he picks a fight with him, things will go way worse.
He tries to get past him, but then boom, he steps on the ground, and then he grabs Ju-won by the neck and tosses him straight to the floor. We then see some sort of barrier around them, and then Caesar says if you try to forfeit the fight, you'll just be planning on escaping. And so he has formed the two-person Colosseum barrier, and then Justice says his body has gotten much heavier, and he wonders if this puts a strain on other people's bodies. Ju-won then says he has no choice because he can't control his power to maintain the transformation. But maybe he can try this. He tries to punch Caesar, and then he says, "Not inside the two-person Colosseum." And then he instantly retaliates, and then Ju-won gets cut on the shoulder and the chest. He then launches a spear at him, and of course, sadly, Ju-won gets stabbed in the liver, but then he manages to catch it so it doesn't go any deeper. Caesar is like, "Is that really all you have, Justice?" Because he thought that I would tremble at your name beforehand. He kicks Justice or Ju-won, and then he tells him, "You need to give this your all next time." And then Ju-won is like, "Give my all." He could win easily if he uses all of Justice's powers, but if he does, then he could easily undo the transformation that he's doing right now. He says without power control, his powers might run out, and he might get so tired that he'll just pass out instead. And then he realized, my powers might run out. Caesar then is spinning his little spear and says, "You must be mocking me by not using your powers, are you?" And then he says, "Well, that's just good for me." His spear then gets caught on fire, and there are purple lightning around it as well. And he says, "As long as I kill you, the other heroes will stop acting up." He then lunges at him with his spear, and then it looks like he had stabbed him through the shadow. But unfortunately, our boy just caught it with one hand and said, "You were right." He then unleashes his aura, and our boy is like, "Goku, Super Saiyan Blue transformation." And Caesar is like, "What the heck?" We are then shown two glasses of water. One is empty and the other is full. Ju-won explains to us that super abilities are like a glass of water, and that if you use it up, the water level gets closer to the bottom. And then he says, however, Justice's abilities aren't at the level of the cup. They're at the level of the vast ocean. And then we see the cups in an entire ocean just floating. He then says, "I'm overflowing with power," and he loads up some aura into his fist, and he mentions how he was using it so sparingly. Caesar is like, "Oh gosh, I think this is the enemy." Boom! Caesar is punched in the face, and his gold helmet and his cheeks are probably crushed from that. He says Justice isn't worried about his power going out, because it is literally so much. He then punches Caesar, and our boy gets sent flying. Too bad for Caesar, because our boy Ju-won finally knows how to use the powers of Justice. No pun intended there. We see Haze with her legs crossed and her awesome sword laying on her seat. She seems to be pondering. Her assistant asks, "Why are you so restless?" And then Haze asks, "Why has Justice not signaled that he has arrived yet?" The horned girl says, "Yeah, he is later than usual." And then she says, "Perhaps he met Caesar on the way." She then says that there's no way that he'd get caught up there for so long. And then the girl with horn asks, "Where the heck are you going?" Haze says that she needs to go check for herself. And honestly, I hope that their secret does not get exposed. And then we go back to Justice literally punching Caesar in the face. He gets pushed back, but he's still on his 2 feet, and his entire helmet is literally crushed. He then says that Justice seems like a different person now. And until now, whenever Ju-won used his power fully, he always tried to control it, so the transformation was lifted. But then, what if he lets it free? He then goes to attack Caesar, and then they launch a barrage of attacks. And then Justice is literally combating him with just his fists, and Caesar's spear is about to get destroyed. He uses an uppercut on Caesar, and I know that it is gut-wrenching.
Caesar says as there's no way that he's getting overpowered by justice and that he won't acknowledge this ever. He stomps again, and then he says if one bigger Colosseum works, then he'll have to put two up. We then see that two of them are up now. Juwon or Justice has gotten slower, and then Caesar goes to attack him once more. Juwon then uses his fist and also tries to attack his spear, and of course, Caesar's spear is literally shattered into a million pieces, and he says no way. We then see the fist going towards Caesar's face, and blam, our boy has been defeated. The barrier breaks as well as this man's jaw, and we see Caesar in a very weird cartoon-like position. Juwon then says that was risky, and that he didn't think he could dodge it, so our boy just went for it. And if he shattered his knuckles, then that would have not been good as well. He takes a look behind him, and an entire building is literally collapsed by the fighting of people. We see a girl, and she's on the wall, and there is a dude with some green laser blasters. Justice then says it looks like what he has heard is true, and they really give zero craps about the surrounding when they're fighting villains. We also see some girl and she blocks a purple flame attack, and then it goes and crashes into the building above Juwon. Boom! It is literally sliced in half and the debris is about to fall. Juwon then looks up and says he needs to get this out of the way. He sees Caesar on the ground, and then he says if he sees him here and leaves him here, then he'll probably die because he's completely defenseless and knocked out. The building is about to fall, and I don't think that he has enough time to think about it. He then says, why am I even thinking about this? This guy literally tried to kill me. Also, whether he lives or dies, that's what he deserves. It shouldn't be any of his business. The building is about to crush Caesar. But boom, our boy literally grabs him and does the dash like he's Flash or something. He says he's going crazy. And then he says, to Caesar while he's unconscious, when you wake up, you gotta repent for your actions and live a good life. That is the goal right there. And then, as they're running, another building is going to collapse. But of course, Juwon just uses his back to carry it. And then we see Chrome, and she's lifting the building up. And she says, I'm here to support you. She then says seriously, as she literally pushes off the debris away. And then she says, you really helped out a villain. Are you out of your actual mind? And she uses his dark and purple aura to scare our boy. Juwon then says, I couldn't leave him to die there, right? Even though he is a villain, everyone deserves a chance at life. And a second chance. Juwon then asks her, isn't this something Justice would do? But just at that moment, we see Caesar, and he gets up instantly, and he pushes Justice away, and he goes to hold Chrome as hostage. And it looks like it wasn't the right decision. Juwon is like, what the heck? And Caesar says, I can't be dragged like this. And Chrome says, see, this is what you get for trying to save a villain, and that Justice's position isn't something that Juwon can protect with such a careless attitude. And then he says, whether I live or die, don't let Caesar get away. Chrome says Caesar is a leader of the villains here, and letting him away could be very risky for Justice, because that would show that Justice is pretty incompetent. Caesar says, what are you two mumbling about? I'll really kill you, Chrome. And then Justice or Juwon says, no, don't. And then Caesar says, you finally get what's happening here, right? But in a split second, our boy goes faster than light, and then crushes our man's or Caesar's skull to the wall. And I know our boy's head is literally injured badly. We also get a flashback to when there was a purple monster, and there was a hero and a little girl there as well. Juwon then says, I guess villains really are just villains. And then he also says that he should be the one to clean up for the mess that he made. Chrome says, Justice or Juwon sure knows how to talk, alright? So I guess maybe he is better at talking than fighting, but I'm sure he will catch up. Chrome says, it's already too late, so you need to send the signal. And then Ju-won is like, oh yeah, you're right. And he just instantly leaves or lets go of Caesar and he just falls to the ground. He says, justice here. Behalf of all the Guardians, I'm here at the target location. He then says, I'm number one. Oh, how hard it is to earn 200 million won. Chrome then says, as she's looking at Caesar, Caesar's quite eccentric, but he is really skilled. And then she also says, even if Ju-won uses Justice's powers, he couldn't have won against him with the skills from last time. So that means our boy is catching up. She then wonders, does that mean his skill grew in such a short time? And then Ju-won is just looking at Caesar's body, wondering if he's pretending to be unconscious again. Chrome says, she just took him to be a money-crazy punk, but it seems that she can expect more from him, really. Ju-won is like, wait, Caesar's not breathing. But we see somebody else looking at them from afar. And it is Haste. And she says, Justice just sent the signal. Then Haste says and replies, yeah, I saw it myself. And she is on top of the building. And we see at least 8 villains literally slaughtered and dismembered badly because of Haste and her dangerous sword. She then looks down and says, something is really strange. And we see Chrome and Justice talking, while Haste is just on the building, wondering just what in the world could be going on. We see Ju-won or Justice, and he is like, bruh. He says, geez. And then Chrome asks, what's with the lifeless face? He says he's going to die of exhaustion. And honestly, I don't even blame him. From going from a literal part-time copycat to a full-time hero. He then says it's great that he can maintain the transformation by not restricting the power, but darn, it really did tire our boy Jo-woon out. She then says, even so, somehow, you use Justice's powers just as is, right? And she calls him amazing, and she gives him a very beautiful smile. Ju-won then starts to blush, and then he is like, why is she so nice all of a sudden? And then Ju-won says, so did you try it? And then he says, about that. We then see him, and then there is a dead body in front of him with a literal hole in his torso. And then he says, if he touches an ability user's dead body, maybe he could have absorbed the powers that were inside him like Justice. And then we get a flashback to when he touched Justice, and then he got his powers. He then begins to try and touch the man. Hold up. And then we see a little bit of lightning. But boom, something happens. And then it seems he had a reaction, and he can't absorb their powers. It seems like he got some type of blockage, and it bounced right back into him. Chrome then starts to ponder and says, maybe you can only absorb one power, or maybe because Justice's powers are just way too strong. He then scratches his head and says, it's too difficult to come to a conclusion, and it's not worth our time. Chrome says, anyways, you've worked so hard, so make sure to have fun today. He asks if there is a party or something, and she says, of course there is. And she looks at him as she opens the door. She says, your win was basically the Guardians' win as well, and so we should celebrate, and they are in the party room. They got beers, and some dude even got an entire chug of it. And he says, let's time to celebrate. They then say, Justice is here. And they say, I heard you defeated Caesar and got there before everyone. And the man raises his beard towards Justice. One of the dudes says to him, there are barely any villains left, so won't we go jobless at that rate? And then they ask, what will you do about this? And they are just having a blast. We then see the girl from earlier, and we also see a Power Ranger holding a beer. He says, what will I do about it? And then Justice or Ju-won says, drink, of course. And they are having a blast. We then see Ichiro as well as his co-leader. And he says, those clowns are way too hyped up. They say they're so puffed up right now. And he asks if Ichiro is going to do anything about that. He says, it's not like they're going to be happy afterwards. And Devel is like, do you have something planned for them perhaps? And he has his arms crossed and folded. The man says, rather than calling it a plan, It's more like their smiles will go away on their own. And honestly, guys, I don't know if they're planning something devious. It is 7 a.m., and of course, our boy turns off the alarm clock instantly. It seems he's in a very bad position, and he says that he feels like his head is splitting apart right now. And then he also mentions how the drinking capacity of those heroes are no joke. And we see them literally drinking so much, and some dude literally only has his tie on. He says anyways, he's going to stay here from now on. And he is at Justice's mansion or his penthouse. It looks awesome, and the view is very beautiful as well. It literally has an entire chandelier, and it is literally made of marble, and it looks so cool. He then goes down the stairs and says he wonders if this is normal for a number 1 ranked hero. And then now that he thinks about it, we see he has 2 billion won in his account. He gives a loud or a bright smile and says he is successful. However, he looks at the chair, and we get a very sad flashback to Justice there sitting, dead. Ju-won is like, this doesn't just end with me getting the money, because Justice was assassinated, and Justice's autopsy report that Chrome gave him. He starts to read it, and then it says that there were no traces on the outside, but he wasn't poisoned either. Also, there are confirmed use of his powers before death. And so, the only conclusion is that he frantically used his powers before his death, so he might have been in a very serious battle. He wonders what in the world happened that day, and then he hears something behind him. He says she's just in time because he thinks it is Chrome. And then he says, hey, I was just looking at the autopsy report you gave me, but then it isn't Chrome, but it is Haste. And then he instantly crouches down behind his couch, and he is like, why is she here? It's like she's coming here like she does it every single day. She says, hey, Justice, are you here? And then she looks behind the couch, and she's like, what are you doing down there? And it is our boy Justice, and he is doing literally 1 finger, 1 arm push-ups with his hand behind his back. She then says, training the next day after the party, as expected. And then Justice says, it's really nothing. We then see the autopsy reports below the couch. Haste then says, you said there was another assassination attempt against you. And then she says, this isn't the first time, and you need to talk about this with somebody really. And then Haste says, so this is the reason she wasn't surprised at that time. It makes sense. Obviously, it wouldn't be that surprising if people tried to kill Justice. But then she literally goes to hug Justice. And she says, you're so mean for not telling me anything, as she is literally on his torso. And then he is like, what the heck is this? And then she says, we decided from now on that you'll call me Yunwoo when it's just the 2 of us, right? And then Ju-won is like, wait, he's sweating profusely. And he's like, don't tell me these 2 were actually dating, right? And the chapter comes to an end. We see her hugging Justice, and they seem to be a really cool looking couple, although it's like red versus blue. And our boy gives the super surprised Sigma face, and he was like, Haste is Justice's girlfriend, and he says that he envies him because of this. But come on, our boy Justice is literally a Sigma male. He says there was nothing in this when he gave him the information that he should look at, and so he wonders if Justice just hid it from him. Anyways, Haste asks, so you won't say anything? And then he wonders, what now? He wonders if he should call her by her name. And then, oh no, guys, he decides to say it. Sorry, Yunwoo. I guess the name hasn't stuck yet because I don't call you that outside, as he is smiling and has his hands on his shoulder. Haste then smiles and says, is that so? And she says, I almost was upset for you calling me by my hero name. And Ju-won is like, really? And just at that moment, she looks up and says, suddenly you put on a straight face, so, but she doesn't know that she is getting ready to unsheath her blade. And she jumps up to the air and boom, she slices him. Sing! Our boy literally just got trolled. She then stands there and says, I almost thought you were the real Justice. And then
We look at the back, and the desk and the couch are literally sliced just from the impact of her blade. Our boy Ju-won looks back like, ain't no way I'm winning against that. She then says, before I start asking any further questions, let me cut off an arm or two. And she has the look of Dojun and the Dad is Too Strong manhwa. Shout out to you guys if you guys know what I'm talking about. We then figure out that is Haste. She is the vice captain of the Guardians, and she is led by Justice. And her ability is... But before we find out, she looks at Ju-won and she has her blade pointed, and she is ready to slice him up. She then launches towards him, and she slices up almost everything around him, and our boy barely manages to escape. That was her special move, Super Speed Speedster. And then he says, if she's cutting things like tofu, that means that she is pretty strong. He also says that she gets that she is fast, but how skilled is she at sword wielding? Because that honestly makes her way more OP than any of the other heroes that we have met so far. She wipes the dust off of her blade and goes and launches in for another attack. She's about to slice him, but then our boy puts up two of his forearms to protect the slash. She says, you resemble Justice, and yet you're unnecessarily expending extra power. He says to himself, she is right, but thanks to doing that, that's the reason why he has his arms. And it seems like his arms also got damaged by her attack. He says that he cannot maintain this state indefinitely, and so if that's the case, he'll just have to deal with her when he recovers. And then he launches towards her and punches, but unfortunately, he misses his attack. She then says, I don't know how you won against Caesar, and actually, it's just through brute force. However, what good is it if it isn't compatible with you? And we see her literally use instant transmission to go behind our boy, and she cuts him in the side. She's then looking at her sword and says that she recommends him stop using strength half-wittedly to block her attacks, because if she truly wanted to, she could slash him in each and every direction. She tells him to stay still so that it won't hurt as much. And then he is like, do you think I'll really say okay? You gotta be kidding me. She then launches towards him, and honestly, this girl looks very menacing right now. She's about to slice him, but boom, she barely misses it because our boy catches it, and it seems that it's in his armpit, and it missed the heart. He says, you're so fast, I couldn't even hit you if I wanted to. And so he had to catch it, and then he punched her in her face. But it seems that it did no effect. And then she uses 1,000 cuts, and her boy is getting slashed from every direction. He says at this rate, his arm's going to get cut off. She's about to slice him and slice his arm off, but her blade is restricted. It is chrome, and our boy Ju-won literally got saved by a hair's length. Chrome says, you're still a lunatic as always when it comes to justice. And then she says, I see you're involved too. Try to explain to me what happened here, yeah? And then she easily slices through her shadows and says, after all, your shadows won't be able to stop me. And then she says, Justice was murdered. And then we see Haste, and she seems to be very shocked by this, and she seems very sad. Ju-won is in his ordinary form, and then he says, well, that's just how it turned out. Chrome says we didn't have a choice, and we had to fill in for him right away. And then Haste is like, do you have any idea what you have done? And then she points towards Ju-won and says, even if he has Justice's powers, he's way too sloppy. How long do you think this show will last? She also says you'll get caught eventually. And then Chrome says we can buy some more time before that happens. And then Ju-won just asks her, with a serious face with the bandages on him. And he says, who killed Justice anyway? And why? He says, we need time to find out. And then she instantly refuses to answer that and says, you don't get time to find that out. The murderer will come find you soon. And Ju-won says he won't, or rather, he really can't, because only they know about Justice's death. And Chrome is like, what? And she asks how he knows that. And he starts to ponder. I think our boy really has something up his sleeve, and honestly, I'm pretty excited to see what he is cooking up. Chrome says, how can he be so sure about that? And then we see the table, and she says, I told everyone yesterday that there was an assassination attempt, and there's still no reaction to it. So that must mean. And then Chrome says, whoever the assassinator is, they probably thought that the assassination has come to a failing close. And then he says, you can't be so sure. And she seems disappointed, and then she begins to leave. And Chrome asks, where are you going? Hayes says, I don't know how long this will last for, but you're going to have to clean him up. And then Ju-won just says, I'm getting a lot of hate here. You need to help me. And then Chrome just says, don't even mind her. She says she was the most diligent follower of justice among all the heroes, and it is all too complicated for her to wrap her head around. And we see her, and honestly, I all know this look, guys. She's acting tough, but deep down, she is very sad to have lost Justice, who played a huge role in her life. Chrome says, to be honest, the Guardians are the really only true heroes left, because that's the reason why Justice kept them together with great difficulty, and without Justice, they'll literally just fall apart and leave to the other branches. Chrome says, if that happens, the heroes will have no right to be called heroes, because there won't be any difference between them and thugs. They're just a bit stronger. And she says, so let's do what's needed. Let's stay the heroes. And let's people have hope in heroes. And she looks at Ju-won seriously. And then Ju-won was like, I wonder why this was such a big deal. And he smiles and says, so this is why. He then stands and says, don't worry about it. You saw how I fooled everyone today, right? Ha 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 ha. But then he gets cut off and Chrome gets a phone call. She says that they have a second task to do. We arrive and we see the entrance to a cafeteria. We see Justice and he is eating food. And it looks to be a really good meatloaf. We see him and Chrome eating. And the other heroes are like, what is Justice doing here? He then looks at them and they instantly avert their gaze because they're literally scared to meet his eyes. He says, all right, about doing what's needed. And then she says, we are already doing it. She says Justice was almost assassinated. And then Chrome says, we need to show he is all good now. He says, I get that, but I feel like I'm getting an upset stomach eating all of this, because I guarantee Justice probably eats 10,000 calories a day. Chrome tells him to just get used to it, and that he'll have to do more of this later on, not less. And then he looks kind of confused because she says today is the hero's OT. She points towards some people walking, and she says every other 3 months, heroes are recruited. It's also the biggest event for Atrium, and that's where it's decided of which 4 groups you will join. We then see an image of how it works. It's the same as how clubs recruit members among the freshmen in university. And though it's a much more important issue than clubs, and then Justice or Ju-won is like, of course it's way more important. And he asks what he has to do. He wonders if he has to fight another villain. And then Chrome just stands up and says, let's go and I'll tell you when we get there. She says, close your mouth. We can't have Justice looking all nervous now, can we? And then he says, still, I didn't think it would be at this scale. There's way more heroes here than the last meeting. He then says, what do I need to do? And Chrome says nothing. She looks at him and says, don't do anything. She says the most skilled person doesn't need to show anyone anything anyways. And she tells him to just sit in the center, looking all serious. He looks around and says, this is more boring as expected. And then we see all of the other clans and the leaders and co-leaders sitting down. He says, I wonder why Ubermensch and the Union have way more people. And then Chrome says, Guardian is kind of weak when it comes to numbers. They all have powers, so they want to profit from them. And then we see Haste, and she had just arrived. He then greets her, and she says, don't delude yourself. I'm just playing along. I still didn't like you. And our boy just got rejected so fast. And he says to himself, it's not like Justice's death is my fault. And then the first battle have started. We see a guy with red hair, and we see a guy that looks like a military jacked officer. It is a Guardian versus Ubermensch match. It begins, and the guy launches an attack towards the red-haired fellow, and it seems that he can turn his hands to stone. The red-haired fellow then uses his attack and gives an uppercut, which is more of a slap, with his lightning ability, and he gets pushed back. The Guardian guy says, "You got quite a spice to you, huh?" And then he seems pretty impressed. He then launches for another attack, and they're going back and forth in the air. Ju-won asks, "Why are they fighting?" And then she says, "I told you, it's an OT. They're promoting themselves to attract groups." And then Ju-won is like, "So it's a friendly match, huh?" And then she says, "Calling it friendly is kind of unreasonable." We then see the red-haired guy, and he has the Guardian fellow on his back, and he is literally pouncing on him with his hand, and he is about to break his arm, and he also has him just pinned to the ground. We see his hand getting swollen, and then Ju-won stands up like, "Wait," and then Chrome says, "Don't do anything." She says, "Just watch and don't do absolutely anything," because even though he's openly harassing him. She says it's a regular competition, and it's a power of battle between the factions. And he's not doing something illegal, so he has no grounds to stop it, even though he is justice. We then see the red-haired guy loading up his power, and he says, "How about you raise your hand and surrender before your arm gets crushed? That way, he will let him go. Or is it because I'm pressing down on your arm so hard that you can't do it?" And he is about to crush it, but then somebody stops him. And then Haze and Chrome are like, "What the heck are you doing?" We then see Ju-won's sister, and she's smiling and says, "Whoa, then will you go to the place where the heroes are?" Ju-won's like, "Atrium?" And he says, "I guess I will." She also says, "You're so petty. I want to go to Atrium too. You always have fun alone." And then he says, "Who said I'm going alone?" And he says that if he goes there, he will take her with him. They make a pinky promise, and she smiles because she knows it'll be filled with other heroes who stop bad guys. And she says if she's there, she will feel super safe. And this was a flashback, and honestly, rest in peace to his sister. Ju-won then says, "People trust and rely on us, yet you're here giggling while tormenting another hero." He asks the hero, "Do you have any shame?" And then the man says, "What are you doing? Why are you butting in? Are you siding with him because he is a guardian?" And then we see the man's hand, and it is literally bruised to death. And then the guy says, "My goodness, what will you do if I don't stop?" He then tries to launch an attack at Justice. And then he also says to himself that he has the ability to use forces, attraction, and repulsion. And yet you dare hold the gauntlet that amplifies the power like an idiot. He calls him a washed-up hero, and he is about to launch his attack. But our boy Ju-won literally just crushes his gauntlet and his arm, and he's about to break it. And then he says, "All you need to do is raise your hand to surrender, remember?" And then he gives a very menacing look, and he says, "Or is that something you can't do?" Let's go. Our boy Ju-won really is doing what's right, and honestly, our boy really is a good substitute for Justice after all. As he is crushing his hand, another one holds onto his arm, and he seems to have a psycho watch. P.S. It might be the one that Dojin got from Yunhee. Anyways, it is Trium. And then he says, "What are you doing here?" Trium then says, "Should you be meddling in a match like this?" And then he starts to load up some of his powers. And he says, "If you want to fight so badly," boom, he launches an attack at Ju-won. He starts to walk towards him, and then he says, "You should fight somebody at your own level." We then see the other heroes watching, and they say, "Is Justice and Trium going to fight one-on-one right now?" They say that this will be a match of the century. Haze is like, "No." And then Chrome is like, "It's not strange for Haze to be acting like that, because right now Lee Ju-won can barely control his justice powers." She says that he's really good at releasing a crap ton of power, but Trium is the worst type of opponent he could ever have. Justice is like, there's no need for us to fight here. And Trium says, yeah, that's where you're wrong, buddy. He says, what about my dignity if I step back when you come forward like this? He cannot let that happen. And our boy Ju-won looks kind of nervous. He releases some of his power, and he jumps towards to punch him. But unfortunately, he just blocks his attack with his hand and he catches it. And he says, you're far from retreating, huh? It looks like you really want to do this. And then he also starts to suck his power and he says, it seems like you don't understand. And Ju-won is kind of confused because he feels his power leaving his body. Trium then says, it is my turn. And he's about to punch Justice with his attack and boom, our boy gets uppercutted. But of course, Ju-won protects himself with his iron steel arms. He says that his arms are tingling all over and all of this strength. It seems very convincing. He then tries to punch him again and our boy literally doesn't even move and Trium just releases his powers back to him. He says he doubted it, but Trium really is attacking him with his own strength. And we see our boy, Trium, and he has red and blue aura. He says this isn't like you, and he calls Justice or Ju-won pathetic, and he launches another attack at him. The other heroes start to begin talking, and they say, isn't he totally overpowering Justice? What is this supposed to be? And Chrome says it's natural for him to be overpowered, because Trium's ability is absorption. And then we see him literally wrecking our boy Ju-won. She says no matter how hard he hits Trium, he will only counterattack equally strong. And so if he continues, it'll be a one-sided defeat. We then see Ju-won and he seems kind of exhausted and there's smoke coming out of him. And then Trium says, why won't you do anything? Are you really the pride of the Guardian, the strongest hero, Justice? And then the other heroes start to gossip and are like, that's right, why is he just defending? Ju-won then says, dang it, they're all talking about it. He acted carelessly because he was too excited about being a hero. And then he says he could have easily earned money if he just followed Chrome's orders. We then see Trium launching towards him with his fist, ready with his aura attack. Ju-won then leans towards him as well. And then he says, if they can act like heroes because they have powers then he might as well stop them by using his own strength. He then launches Trium with his own powers and he says, openly charging at me won't result in any different. But he was wrong. Our boy is literally unleashing his entire ocean of energy. And oh my gosh, this is so hyped. He says he's just a good fighter like Justice anyways. And so he'll unleash so much power that Trium won't be able to absorb it. And our boy is about to get overpowered and Trium calls him a freaking rascal. And they're going head on. And even the people in the stands like Chrome and Haste are getting affected by the aftershock. Chrome says, this is massive. Justice was overpowered, but now Trium is barely keeping up. And she says if they both keep this up, to hell with a friendly match. Trium will not even be standing anymore. But just at that moment, they instantly bow down or they seem to have gotten heavier. Because we see somebody walking with his Adidas sandals, and it is no one other than Arcadia. And we see one of his eyes, and then we see that he has orange eyes as well. Ju-won says that he can't even move a single inch. And then Arcadia says, stop making a fuss and end this here. Ju-won and Trium both stop, and then Trium dusts off his suit, and then he walks away like, Ju-won is like he shouldn't have done that, but then they say Justice, and it is a guy who had his arm literally beaten. He says something like this happened because of me, and then he says he's too ashamed to show his face. He bows down to Ju-won and says, thank you for stepping up. And Ju-won says, don't even mention it. And then we see the other heroes and they are like, it was amazing, as expected of Justice, and I'm really happy for Ju-won. And this is what true heroes are made for. He says, that's right. It was good enough. We then arrive at Justice's apartment, And then Hayes slams something on the table. He asks what this is, and then she says these are the number of heroes who join each group. Chrome says, see, your actions may have stopped the tragedy from happening. However, as always, and we see the new hero's registration status. And obviously, Guardian has the least out of all of them, including last year and this year, and Guardians can't seem to be taking any more L's. Juwon is looking at the list. He is like, wait a second, was the difference always so extreme? And then Hay says, it hasn't always been like this. They said not only did our hero lose, and with the villain forces being so weak at present, not that many people really do want to join the Guardians. Hayes explains that if this continues, they'll be taken over by Ubermensch, which is way more influential. And then Juwon asks, is that such a big problem? And Chrome reminds him what type of people they are. She says, as long as they're skilled, they'll even side with the villains. It's a real total meritocracy, which is basically like a clan only governed by people with skills. She asks him, what do you think will happen if a group like that has full authority in Atrio? Juwon then says, why don't we just make an alliance? Chrome then says, even if we do that, who will we ally with? She says Al Condor is way too extreme. Union only thinks about their profit and loss, and no need to talk about Ubermensch. And then Hayes says Union may have a little potential, but it might not be that simple because of how they are. Chrome says, unless we have somebody in the inside. And then our boy Juwon has his arms folded and he says, well, that's easy then. Hayes is like, what did you say? And then he says, it might be a bit intense to do two people at the same time, but... And he's typing on his phone. And Chrome is like, don't tell me. And then he shows him his red phone screen. And then he says, that type of unsider. He then shows him a calculator and shows 2 billion won. And he gives a smile and a smirk and says he will serve you for the price of 1 justice. This is hilarious. We are then at a pool party on top of a building. We then see some DJ, and we also see some girls there, and everybody's having a blast. Juwon asks, why are we here? And then Chrome tells him, Wilhelm. He is ranked 3rd in the Union, and unlike others, this guy really is popular. And there at Union, a hero's ranking is solely based on somebody's popularity. She says, although they barely work as heroes, they throw parties almost every single day, so they have a real huge network. And honestly, this might sound like a fun life, but trust me, partying can only last so long. Haste says, there is a voting today, and is expected to take place in Union. So Wilhelm is obviously one of the participants to vote. And then Juwon says, I just have to have manipulative voting happen, right? Chrome is like, will you really be okay? And she has a pretty unbelieving and unsatisfied face on. She says, what's your plan? And Juwon just says, it's not something to brag about, but... And then we see a very pretty lady, and he says that everybody has their preferences. We then arrive and we see some dude, and he says, look. And of course, Wilhelm has arrived. He has this weird-looking hairstyle, and there seems to be some dude behind him. He says, everyone, isn't this party awesome? He says, heroes shouldn't only be saving the day. They should party every single day. And the rest of the heroes laugh. He says, let's go crazy till the morning. And then he takes his leave. The guy behind him says, I think you've had a bit too much to drink. And Wilhelm just says, this is just a start. What are you talking about? And then he looks back and says, by the way, how the heck can you be wearing that? It's literally like a work suit of some sort of mechanic. He says he's just here as an escort. And then Wilhelm is like, that's a waste of your face. And that's why He doesn't want to be with him because he seems like he's no fun. A lady spills her drink accidentally on Wilhelm as he's talking about a pretty new female trainee and how it would be better if she would accompany him. Way to jinx it. Well, I guess it is in his favor. He gets spilled on and then he is like, "Do you know how much this cost?" And then the girl says, "I'm sorry, I drank too much," and she says that she will wipe it off for him. But then Wilhelm says, "It's okay. This happens a lot at parties." She then touches where it's spilled on and she says, "I'll wipe it off for you, somewhere a bit more quiet." And then we see him with his arms wrapped around her. And he says, "Well, if you insist, then I guess I can show you to somewhere nice." He then bids farewell to the escort. And he says, make sure nothing happens while he's away. And the escort seems pretty sharp. And he knows something could go wrong. He enters a password to his house or his suite. And we see it and it looks very vibey. And just at that moment, he is like, okay, how do we do this? But then the girl, her arm literally turns into a buff man's arm. And of course, it is our boy Lee Ju-won. And he transforms into the Justice arm. He hits him in the back and he is instantly knocked out. And he says, "Thanks for letting me in." And he also says that he knew that he would fall for the trick as he transforms back to his original identity. He says, "Let's see where the conference tablet would be." And as soon as he finds it, he realizes that you need eye recognition and even fingerprint recognition. And he says that Wilhelm does pay attention to security measures despite having such a funky personality. He then transforms into Wilhelm, and then obviously it doesn't have a password and it's just facial recognition. And of course, easy peasy and Ju-won is ready to join the meeting. We then see Arcadia and he's like, "Wilhelm, you're quite early." And then he says, "Should I be complimenting you for joining?" And then Wilhelm says, "I'm just at a party." Arcadia just says, "Yeah, it's whatever," as he's sitting down. And of course, he still has his slides on. He says, "You know, it's voting time, right?" And anyways, the upcoming Heroes meeting, they'll need to decide whether to work with the Guardians like they proposed. He says based off the majority of the votes, they will decide upon the opinion of the whole union. And so they have to decide of the number of votes. We then see number 1 is Arcadia, number 2 is Banshee, and number 3 is Wilhelm. Ju-won then says to himself that they are really crazy for voting based on how popular you are, and not even like it's a game show. And he wonders if Union is just like a game show. He then says that the decrease in villain forces was fairly recent, so even with Union, opinions will be divided. Ju-won then says, with a smile on his face, that with Wilhelm's votes, he can definitely turn the voting result around. All 3 have voted. And then Arcadia is like, "Oh, are you all done? Because the result of the voting is..." And then it seems like he is kind of surprised. Banshee asks if there is a problem, but all he says is that no, but how should I put this? The result is a bit unexpected. He says whatever and everybody's dismissed, and so now they will act according to the results. He transforms back with the iPad in his hand and he gives a sigh of relief because honestly I would be so nervous too if I had just knocked somebody out. We see Chrome sitting there waiting and Ju-won appears suddenly and he's like, "How long did you wait for?" She ignores this question and then she just says, "How did it go?" And he says, "How else? I proved my worth my salt. 2 billion won." And he gives a very wide smile and our boy looks like he's on the front of a cover magazine. Wilhelm wakes up and then the escort is like, "You really can't remember?" And he says, "I must have drank too much." Wilhelm says, "I'm sure I hit the spot. What a waste, dude." And then he says, "I just joined the meeting. Just fine too. Darn it." Then he's like, "The meeting? Yeah, I voted with my own name. I think I just entered, threw in the vote, and left." And then he says, "Who was that woman? Did I not get her number?" And then the escort says, "Mr. Wilhelm, please give me the list of every single person you invited today." And I knew it, this escort really is a busybody. Well, of course, it's his job as an escort. Ju-won opens up a cabinet, and then he wonders if he has to take these things with him. We are at Ju-won's old apartment. He says that he was going to act as justice for a while, so he packed all the stuff he would really need, and we see Chrome talking to him. He also says that Hayes did not seem satisfied at all by that, but they're all no-brand clothes, and he wonders if he should go get new ones now. Just at that moment, as he is tossing away these old clothes, he finds something under the shirt. He says, I was wondering where I kept this, and it is a picture of him and his family. Seon-ah, she would have loved to see me transformed as Justice, and Seon-ah was his sister. He wants to take it home, but then boop, it accidentally falls apart, and the picture falls underneath the bed. He says, what a hassle. He pushes up the bed, but boom, it crashes into the literal ceiling. And our boy is like, what the heck just happened? We see him on Justice's chair, and then he says, I'm telling you, that really happened this morning. And then Chrome was like, how about now? He picks up a pen and he crushes it with utter ease. And then Chrome picks it up and she is like, it looks like you're using some of Justice's powers. The powers might even be awakening. And our boy Ju-won is literally confused by her statement. We then see an explanation of this, and she says superpowers are pretty similar to muscles. The more you use them, the stronger they get. Even more so for a rookie. It's just like going to the gym as a newbie. She says, at first you thought you could just copy appearance, but the potential might even be higher than she expects. She says, it's also time to focus on the task in front of us. And so he instantly transforms into Justice. And he says, I guess it's already time for the meeting. We see all 8 of them from the different leagues that they can join. And Arcadia says, sorry about the video call, I had to go away for work. And Novelle is like, whatever, let's just start. And there's only one agenda today, right? How will we assign the heroes? Novelle says, as we discussed before, but then Arcadia cuts him off and he says about that. And then Arcadia says, Union will support the Guardian stance. Let's go. Novelle is like, wait, what? Why so suddenly? And then he says, as you may know, we decide everything by voting. And the voting result was that they should focus on going after the remaining villains. And as a leader, he's going to respect that position. Novelle is like, what nonsense. And then Zeus says, I really don't get why you are so against catching criminals. And Zeus is in the middle of a battlefield, killing different types of monsters, as he is in the video call. Novelle says, is there a special reason for you to oppose it? Because they already destroyed the villain base and put it into pieces during the last operation. And then Ju-won says, I don't think that is true, and that we won't waste our human resources. He says it may look like they're all dead, but villains pop up anywhere, and with their leader gone, pulling out the roots is the way to avoid any future troubles. Banshee says that she'll follow the chief's order per the voting. And then Pandora also says, why are you siding with the villains, Novelle? And Novelle looks very nervous. Trium then says, if everyone agrees, what can we do? And he says, cleaning up all the villains will be good for them anyway. And he says, we can't win votes as the villains. So this time around, we'll follow the Guardian stance as well. And then Haste was like, are you seriously still considering your own interests? Because this guy really is cocky. Ju-won gives a sigh of relief. And then he is like, it somehow worked out. And just at that moment, Chrome looks up and there is a hole in the roof from Ju-won's bed. She says that this is serious. And he says, I told you. Chrome asks, how will you explain this to the owner, Ju-won? And then he says, I'll just pay him for it. At the end of the day, he does have 4 billion won. He says from the first day he changed into Justice, everything has changed. And he throws the little pieces of garbage into the trash can. I guess some things and some habits don't change. She says, what do you mean? And Ju-won says, why are you doing this, Chrome? Chrome says, I told you, we need justice alive for heroes to act like heroes. but then he says it's dangerous. And then he asks her, I thought you might have a personal reason for that. And then it looks like she does, but she just says, it's nothing like that, as she puts her hood on. And then Ju-won looks at us like, did I say something wrong, guys? She says he spoke too carelessly, and he should have thrown away the trash. But just at the moment, we see the escort standing outside of the balcony, and Ju-won is kind of nervous because he recognizes him. He says, I recognize you. You're the hero Chrome from the Guardians, right? And then he gives a fake smile and says, I did not think I'd run into you in a place like this. She says, I came to meet someone I know. What business do you have here? Stiletto? That sounds like a pretty cool name as a villain. He says, somebody you know, huh? And he starts giving off Ju-won's entire life story. Lee Ju-won, 23 years old, you have the ability to copy others' appearance. And Ju-won's like, I might be exposed here. He says, it seems like an interesting power. I just don't understand one thing. And then he opens his eyes, and this guy looks like a psycho. And he says, why did you come to yesterday's party? He says, I don't understand what, but then he says, don't try to deny it. I already looked into the nearby CCTV footage. Our boy really is a perseverant escort and hero. We then see Ju-won as he changes back from that girl form. Ju-won is like, dang it, and he must have failed to notice the CCTV. Ju-won says, you totally got me. Actually, I don't really like Wilhelm, so dumb me, I wanted to cause him a little trouble. And then he says, his shameless bragging is annoying. He annoyed you, so you troubled him. And then he looks at him with killer intent. And then he asks, who are you trying to trouble by transforming into justice? And it seems like they're caught in the act. He says, I'm not sure, but I have this amusing theory. And he pops out a tooth, which is kind of weird. Chrome was like, why the tooth? And just at that moment, he throws it towards them, and he looks very creepy. And then the tooth explodes, and then it becomes like a sand-like substance, and it traps Chrome inside this dome. He says, that's why. There's something I'd like to know, even if I have to kill you. And he literally uses a bone from his arm and makes it his weapon. And this guy might actually be the one who will end our boy Ju-won. And also, this guy really does look like a psychopath. The chapter starts, and then Ju-won asks, what are you doing all of a sudden? The man says, Stiletto. He says, I told you, I really have to confirm something. Stiletto says, I thought that Justice was acting weird lately. He says, sure. He revealed that there was an assassination attempt, but there was still something strange. And also now, Justice's confidant, Chrome, is together with a shapeshifter. And he says it's way too suspicious as he launches towards him, and he seems like a Blue Lock character. He slices Ju-won, and it is just a minor scrape on his neck. Ju-won then gets a flashback or some imagery in his head, and he says, why are all these heroes always after my life, dude? Come on, can this guy catch some slack? Like literally, guys, our boy has literally been fighting top class heroes after just shape-shifting and going out to bars, drinking and covering for heroes. The man says, I think you're impersonating Justice. What about my theory? What do you think? And Ju-won says, that sounds like a complete load of trash. He then loads up his power, and Stiletto is kind of surprised. He says, I didn't think you'd tell me the truth so easily. And he uses another blade to come out of his other arm. And he says, it looks like I have to force you to speak up. He then walks towards him. And then Ju-won says, Justice's assassination probably wasn't by him. And then he says, it doesn't matter. And then they launch towards each other. He says, if I just meekly acknowledge it, my 2 billion won will literally turn to dust. And so there's no way that he can do that. They clash head on. And then Stiletto says that you suck at using your strength, and your attack is way filled with holes. He says that's not true, because Stiletto said just use Justice's method,
And of course, our boy doesn't want to lose a 2 billion won. He says, "You've become too complacent." And then he says, "If you keep using your power half-heartedly," he gives him a look of despair and says, "You will die." He launches an attack towards him, and Ju-won barely manages to catch onto it, and he gets pushed and pinned to the ground. He is pushing, but then Ju-won kicks him up, and they seem to be on their feet again. He then manages to immobilize his arms from moving, and then he says, "You're hiding your power. Actually, you're not, but it seems like you don't know about manifestation." Ju-won is like, "What is manifestation?" And of course, we get the typical anime explanation while they're fighting. He says, "The body is so weak, so it desires strength. It covets the majesty to lead others. And power is pretty much related to all the desires of humans." And he says, "I can't believe you mindlessly wield the power without knowing such basic knowledge. Don't you feel that power is going to a waste?" And Ju-won is like, "Huh? Shut up and fight me." He also says, "Well, you thought well to stop me using my bones on my hands, but unfortunately, that's not the only place my bones can come out of." And his elbows turn into a weapon of bones as well. It is about to hit him, but he manages to dodge it by a hair. He then tackles him, and he goes up against the wall. He has his hands on his head, and he kicks him. And our boy's knee is literally in pain because it seems that our boy Stiletto had a trick up his sleeve. He asks him, "Where do you think the hardest part among humans' bones are?" And then he says it's the skull. And we see our boy wearing a mask. And this looks pretty scary and pretty cool at the same time. Bro really is the skull emoji. He says, "Ow, ow." Ju-won also says that his face doesn't suffer any injuries, and so he might be telling the truth. Until now, Ju-won says that he was solely focused and solely preoccupied by not getting caught. And then he also says while thinking that it was just an unfortunate occurrence back then. But myself, who couldn't do anything and would fall at the slightest, he hated himself so much, and yet he got this power. And we see him and his reflection of justice on the floor. He asks himself, "What the hell am I doing?" And I think we should all ask ourselves these questions sometimes. As he is thinking, Stiletto appears right behind him, and he says, "I didn't mean you could go blank right now." He then tries to hit him, but our boy crouches down, and it seems like our boy just literally missed it by a hair again. Ju-won then thinks to himself, his body may have gotten stronger. However, winning is literally impossible, so he has to think of another way. He loads up his punch, and boom! He goes for a jab, but unfortunately, Stiletto steps to the side. And now, he has his bone attack right by his ear, and he says that was not enough. And then Ju-won just smiles and says, "Who said I was aiming for you?" And at that instant, Chrome's shadows surround him and hold him in place. Chrome says, "Thank you for that advice. I was getting a bit too frustrated, you know." And then we see Stiletto kind of pissed. She says, "You'll have to brace yourself, you bag of bones." It looks like Chrome was not happy being inside of our boy's tooth. We see Stiletto bound by Chrome's darkness, and of course, he says, "I see." And then we see Ju-won literally smiling because he says, "You really do know how to trick others." But then he breaks free from the darkness and says that they don't just come out of my hands. He then leaps towards Chrome, but then Chrome, of course, launches some of her attacks and it puts him to a stop. But then he uses some of his bones that he rips off from his hand and tosses it towards Stiletto. She says, "This dude really," and just as she is about to get hit, she teleports behind him using her shadow, and it looks like she learned well from Shikamaru. Ju-won is just there and he's saying they're really fighting as equals. As expected of Justice's confidante, she's a skilled fighter. And then he says she attacks with the shadows when she's far and instantly puts distance between us if she gets close. Stiletto then pulls out another one of his tooth. Oh gosh, that must hurt. And then he launches it towards her. Boom. We see it both blow up. But then Chrome says, "I will not fall for it twice." and she lets it go through her. She wonders where he is, and then he is right on top of her and he's ready to stab her. She sends some of her darkness up to stop him, but she still gets hit on the arm. He is about to hit her again, and then she launches more of her darkness. He manages to block it from literal his rib cages coming out of his torso, and then he wipes it away with the rest of his bones. She crouches down and says, "That revelation just now gave me an idea," and she launches up the darkness from within the ground. As we see a literal sort of monster come on top of her, and this is pretty scary. She says, "Try blocking this as well. This is the predator." And then it is about to eat him up, and boom, it seems that he got hit. But then he manages to get behind her using super speed, and his hand is all bonalized, or whatever it's called. But then she doesn't even move, and she says, "Seeing how the bone went, we are the same." And then she asks him, "Are you ready to stop this at this moment?" She says, "It's not like you plan on hitting me anyway." And Ju-won is just like, "What the heck?" And Chrome says before, when he threw his tooth at me, he was aiming literally for behind her. She says, "You fought enough." And then she asks, "How about tell us what you're plotting?" He says this was just a guess before, but the assassination attempt that Justice announced at the hero meeting apparently failed, but Justice must have been assassinated. He then pulls out something, and it seems to be a SIM card over USB. And he says, "Here's a video of you shape-shifting into Justice," and he went through quite the trouble finding it. He then smiles, saying, "If this is revealed, Justice's substitute will also be exposed right away." We then see him looking pretty cool, and then he crushes it just like that, and Ju-won is really confused. He then steps on it to make sure it's really broken, and he says, "I think siding with you guys might not be so bad." And then he smiles, and our boy is literally so weird, and he says, "We're more similar than you think." And Chrome says, "What do you mean?" He says, "I may be an attendant for the Union, but just like them, he is a spy from El Condor," and both of them seem to be shocked. He says right now, Guardian and El Condor are being left behind by the Union at Ubermensch, as we see the scale, and it seems it's going its separate ways. He says they care more about their selfish interests than defeating villains. So, as we see him here, he decided to infiltrate the Union to create commotion from the inside. And Ju-won says, "That means we three will get inside of the Union and flip this whole situation upside down." Chrome says, "How can I be sure that's all the evidence you did have?" He says, "You could have a backup." And he just says, "Whether or not you trust me, it is your choice." But then of course he points towards Ju-won and says, "But I really like your power. There's so many places we could use it." "Well, if you don't want to say yes, don't. But I have some work to do inside the Union. And if you're not on my side, you'll have to compete with me." And then he smiles. Or no, sorry, the smile washes off of his face and says, "You guys will lose to me like a real alpha." Ju-won says, "Do you even understand the situation? Yes, I'm Justice's substitute, so I need to find the culprit who killed him. Are you saying you don't care about that?" He folds his arm, and this guy is literally jacked, and he says, "Yeah, then I can kill the villain who killed Justice, right?" And he says, "Sounds cool to me." Ju-won starts to think, saying, "It makes sense, El Condor members really detest villains." And then he says, "So make a choice, are you with or against me?" Ju-won says, "Okay, let's hear about it for now, so tell us, what are you really up to?" And he gives a menacing smile. We then see some sort of delivery man, and he says, "Ju-won?" And he says, "You must be one of the new heroes." He smiles as he looks back and says, "Of course I got through." He made it where nobody could tell it was a fake hero ID, as we see him right here making it. He says, however, it's definitely a polar opposite to the atmosphere at the Guardian, as we see them all literally sticking to their business, and they seem like they're just chilling and vibing. Somebody says it's because Union is a commercial group, so that's why there's no dress code. And of course it is Chrome, and she is dressed up in literal casual clothing, and of course she's looking really awesome here. She says, "Why are you staring at me?" And he says, "I'm really not. I just wanted to say you are indeed a beauty." And of course she starts to blush like, wait, what the heck just happened? And she got caught off guard. She says, "What nonsense are you spewing all of a sudden?" And then he gets a flashback to her usually with her mask and such. She says, "Shut up and just come here." We then see somebody taking a picture with a hero, and it seems that that is Yum Yum, who is a debuting hero. He says that you don't know, she's a popular online food streamer, as we see here in front of a lot of fries and fried chicken, guys. I wish I could do this. And our girl really is just doing a mukbang as her job. She says, after all, heroes come to Union usually with commercial motives, and she's probably here to increase her followers. They see Stiletto at the back, and then of course, Chrome says it's not a bad plan. After raising their popularity in Union, we get to exercise the voting right, as we see a ballot going inside a box. We then see 3 people on a stage just to signify that it doesn't matter how much experience you have or how good you are. What really matters is people and their attention to you. And then we see some guy with an eye patch and he says, you must know our powers are based on manifestation. We see Stiletto here and he says, based on manifestation, you could use the same power in a variety of ways. And he points to some examples in the back. He says the person with the power almost always loses control over it, and it results in rampage, as we see different heroes that have gone literally rampant. He says if you're interested by that in any chance, I could get you a special on-the-job training, and everybody's are like, yeah, that's definitely what I don't want to do. Somebody then raises her hand and says, can we try that? And it is Ju-won. The guy with the eye patch seems interested, and then the people around him say, are you crazy? Did you ask your crewmates? And then he says, nope, nope, nope. And Ju-won asks Stiletto, are you sure it's okay? Everybody is making a fuss. Stiletto just smiles, saying, for newbies, it would be hard. For someone with Justice's powers, this will be a literal piece of cake. We then enter the training zone, and Chrome says, why do you want me to prepare this place? It's just about the difference in powers. He gets a flashback to when he fought Caesar, and he says back then, he just won because he got to swing as much as he pleased. And with Trium, if he fought any longer, he definitely would have lost. And he says Stiletto was right, as he transforms his hand into something strong, saying, I shouldn't only be in this for the money. We see Liu Ju-won at 18 years old. And then of course his sister's like, what the heck, that is awesome. His dad says, are you that happy? And then he says, it's too early for you to be so happy. And then he shows a picture of him in his suit. And then of course, he says to Siona, his sister, you said you wanted to see the hero Absolute, right? Yeah, Absolute is cool. And then he transforms into Absolute. And this guy, I guess, really has been using his powers since long ago. He says he practiced a little just for today. And then she says, Oppa, you really are the best. But then something comes crashing down and literally obliterating his parents. It is a monster. He says, found the hero, and of course Ju-won is shocked. Siona gets behind him and she says he's scared. And of course he goes to try and hit the thing, but he gets sent flying like a fly I just swatted out of the air. He tells Siona to run away, but then we see the monster and Siona is in its scraps, and she is about to get eaten. What a sad story. We then go back to real time and his arm is on fire, or it has blue aura around it. He punches something and all of them literally break, and of course Chrome is shocked, and he said he wanted to do this properly. We then go back and we see some guy on a computer, and I don't know if this is a 3-monitor setup, but it seems like he has a bunch of them. He says, in Union, that's strange, and then he picks up the phone saying, yes, I saw it, I heard you're coming here. We then see some sort of mud or some sort of clay marks from his feet, and then he opens up this door, and then we hear yelling. We then see him, and one of his eyes is being covered, and then he looks down, and there seems to be faces of some sort with red eyes, and I don't know if it's just you guys, but this really creeps me out even more than gargoyles. They are then walking, and the Stiletto says, rather than that, ability users in crazed violent rage seems more dangerous, and he asks if they will be okay. We then see it is Yum Yum, and then she literally is behind Ju-won. Ju-won is taken aback, and then he's like, what the heck? She says we're the same age, right? Let's get along well. And then of course Chrome asks Stiletto, why the heck did you bring her here? He says, it's great to have Yum Yum who will be the face of the team, especially for those like us who need to hide our identity. And she says, hide your identity? And of course, Ju-won is like, what the heck are you saying? She smiles saying, you guys must be internet broadcasters too, right? And she says, I get it. I was like that at first too, and it seems she really is a blockhead. Ju-won says that he'll go with Chrome, but then of course Stiletto says no, you will go with Yum Yum. Ju-won asks, what are you scheming? And he says, do you remember what the instructor said at the union about manifestation? He says, you can't do it yet, right? And your powers before and after manifestation are a world apart, and so Yum Yum will be able to help with that. He says, as we see Yum Yum literally looking at Chrome, I bet it'll be easier for you to observe and learn from somebody like her. And Stiletto says that if you're still suspicious of me, Chrome can keep an easy eye on it too. They then walk away, and of course, let's see what's going to happen as Ju-won and Yum Yum just stand there pretty awkwardly. He is following Yum Yum, and then he asks, anyhow, I don't even know what powers you have. And she smiles saying, what was that about? Keeping an eye before? He then says, that was definitely way too straightforward. He says, we just met as team members, so he must have meant to do a good job. And she says, I see, and this little girl really is too naive. He asks, what's your power? And she says, mine? And she says, as we see, literal spicy tofu soup, pizza, and fried chicken wings. She says, I can eat all I want and become stronger. And I know all of us wish we could have this power. He asks, why did you become a hero? And she says, I'm just doing it as to get famous as a streamer while eating all she wants. This girl really is smart. He says, the seemingly simple-minded woman has more clarity about the reason for using her powers than I do as she eats a chocolate bar. She then looks around from the corner and says, wait, as we see some sort of monster there, and it really is a wannabe Hulk. He says, it looks like that is our target, and it hasn't spotted us yet. And then we see Yum Yum just eating more and more chocolate bars, and they get noticed, and the monster starts running towards her. She then uses her powers and unlocks her ability, and she seems to have pink flames on the top of her head like bunny ears and some on her hips as well, and she says it's time to beat him up. Boom! She goes towards him and gives him a kick, and this girl really is fast and strong because the monster gets sent flying and crashing into the wall. She does a little pose, and of course I did not expect this. As we see her stretching, and our boy Ju-won is just shocked because her powers are literally just what she said. The monster comes back up, and it hits her, and then he asks if she is okay. And then we see her with her defense up, and she says, did it just burn 300 calories? And then she punches the monster again, and it starts to run away, and Ju-won is like, he's fine even after taking such a blow. And she says, I'll chase him and make sure to contact the other team members. He is about to bring out his phone, but then some sort of muddy being comes up and takes it, and it is a weird guy from earlier. And he transforms into a human with a phone in his hand, saying, are you trying to call your friends? Ju-won then punches him, saying, give it back to me. But the mud just disperses to the floor. The mud then comes up and stabs Ju-won on his right side. Oh gosh, this ability seems pretty OP. He smiles, saying, I already told you no. Ju-won punches him, and he says, what was that just now? Hitting him felt strange. And then he realigns his jaw, saying, why would you just hit someone? Ju-won asks, you, how are you related to the violent ragers who appeared here? And then he says, all of them couldn't manifest, you see, as we see one of them on the ground inside of a red circle, and he seems to have really lost it. He says, as he looks down at the creature, so I'm giving them a little hand so that they can manifest, as he gives a really creepy smile, and it's probably a bit less spookier than the monster in Solo Leveling or the statue. Ju-won then holds his arm towards the injured side and says, I see, you're basically the one who turned them into those creatures. And then lightning comes out from his body, and he says, I guess I don't need to go easy on you then. Of course, the clay guy or mud guy launches towards him and is about to attack him, and Ju-won punches, but his arm is just filled with mud. He then spits some mud out of his mouth, and then Ju-won cannot even take off what's stuck on his body. More attacks come, and then he realizes it's getting harder and harder to move, and staying like this will only cause more trouble. He then launches a punch and says he hit him, and it literally goes through him, and the guy just puts his tongue out saying, you hit where it hurts, huh? And then he realizes he can't pull it out. He then gets sucker punched by the Mudman, and then he loads up another punch even angrier and says, "Try stopping this." But then we see some big buff monster come out of nowhere, and then he tries to punch, but then he gets punched instead, and he puts up his defense as he's set flying. Of course, he's still covered in mud. The Mudman says, "You're really not fun at all. I have plenty of kids like you already. I really don't need to add you to my collection either." And another blue monster comes to his side, and it seems he has two, right at his command. He tells them to get rid of him, and there's something on their necks that I'm guessing obeys the order. He gets punched by one of them, and before you know it, we see some guy literally doing a pose, but it's actually an attack right behind him. He manages to almost slam him, but our boy manages to dodge it just by a hair. He gets punched at the back, and he gets punched from all angles, and it seems like there's no escape. But then, we see him pretty furious, but he's pretty happy as well, saying, "It's all off. Thanks for your help," and all the mud is gone. He then punches the blue monster, and he tells him to get lost. He punches the other monster, and the two of them begin to jump on him. He manages to get down, and he seems really down to the ground. And then he uses some of the lightning on his foot as he leaps up and kicks one or knees one in the head. We see all four of the monsters, and they seem to be really exhausted, and then one of them sticks his tongue out, and our boy Juwon is like, "What the heck? I don't think it gets filthier than that." We then see the monster that Yum Yum was fighting on the ground as she stretches, and she says, "I'm really proud of what I did today," and she wished she should have streamed it. She then says, "Why isn't anyone coming out though?" She wonders if it's too late. But then we see the Mudman again, and he says, "I can't believe you caught all of them. You are quite amazing." And then he introduces himself as, "I'm also a rookie hero, and this guy was our target too, but you stole him from us." And she just smiles, saying, "It was a piece of cake." He then says, as he looks at the monster, he didn't expect the monster to lose. And then Mudman says, "Is he not as strong as I thought? Or is that stupid looking woman quite OP?" She then asks him, "By the way, which group are you with?" And she says, "Judging from your clothes, you're not from Guardian or Ubermensch. You don't seem all that interested in killing villains either." He smiles, saying, "Oh, I'm from Union. I see you don't remember." And she says, "No, I remember everyone from Union, because remembering people is a basic for a streamer." And then we get back towards the lecture, and she says, "I definitely heard that all the rookies participated on the day of the OT, but you weren't there at that time." She then whistles as she walks away, saying, "So I just think it's strange." And then, while her back is turned against him, he says, "I planned on playing with her a bit, and that this is equally thrilling too, so shall I add you to my collection?" But then his arm literally gets disintegrated as she does a 180, and it seems like she knew about this all along. She says touching without permission is an act of an obsessed fan, don't you know? And his hand was literally launched all the way like 50 meters back. She then releases some of her aura, and she says, "I planned on leaving after I digested everything, but it's time to go on a diet." We go back to Ju-won, and he's still punching these dudes with an uppercut and everything he can. They charged after him, and he says, "Come back to your senses. That muddy guy is really using you." But the green-haired guy just says, "I'm hungry," and his mouth has literally opened wide with red eyes. He wonders if they have no intelligence, just like zombies. One of them holds him down, and then he is being launched at by the blue one. And he smiles, saying, "So you are intelligent." And he releases his aura, or even a fraction of his power, as we see they all back off. He looks really scary here, and he says, "However, I think this worked out great. Now I can fight you without holding back." Ju-won says, as expected, he's hecka strong, and then he grabs his fist, and he literally begins to crush it, and then he sends him flying towards one of the other monsters. He says the training really was worth it. We go back to Chrome, and it seems it is a flashback, and she says, "Can the violent rangers turn back into humans, you ask?" He says, "Well, they were originally humans, right? Can't they become humans again?" And then Chrome says, "Those guys are just monsters." And Leto also says, there hasn't been a single case found where a violent rager turned back into a human. They're just monsters that crush and eliminate, and they're no different from villains. He lets up a smile saying, it'll be better for you to eliminate them without hesitating, because like me, they won't go easy on you when they're fighting. As we see Ju-won and he starts to power up, and his eyes turn light blue. We go back to Yum Yum and she says, you saw Ju-won? You didn't do anything to him, right? As he smiles saying, who knows? I think he might have become the monster's food. And he laughs saying, but you're different, what an eccentric superpower. She then says, I want to block. How great would it be to have a block button in reality? We then see his body start to turn to mud, and then he jumps in the air like a ghost and he is about to come collapsing on her. He says, to be honest, I also enjoy tormenting way more. She hits him with a flame, but then he is already behind her and she realizes that this is mud. He attacks her left and right all around, just like water. And then he says, can you still make a sound? Well, she says, of course, and she crouches down a bit, and then she jumps up super highly. He then spits mud towards her, and she eats one of the chocolate bars, and she literally has a Rasengan, or a spirit bomb, and he sends it towards him. Boom. He says, that startled me, and that was really an amazing power. And then he wonders, but with all this force, she must be using a lot of energy, and she can't keep using it constantly, as she begins to eat more chocolate bars as she attacks. She keeps on missing, and this mud guy keeps literally dodging it just by a hair. He says, dang it, how many of these dang chocolate bars does she have? She must have really bought all of them from the Girl Scouts. He says, in that case, boom, he launches up a wall, and she uses one of her abilities, thinking, he's stacking so obviously, I wonder what he's scheming. And then she realizes that her floor is in mud and her feet have been eliminated. Manifestation. We then see he uses Mudstorm as he surrounds her, and this doesn't really look good. She says it's clinging to even her body and it's heavy, and she has to get out of there, and just as she is about to use her punch to get out, oh no, the mud really gets onto her hand, and so she's stuck, and it encirculates her, and she is literally wrapped in mud. He smiles with his hand in his pocket, saying, you see, with my ability, as the fight goes on, the mud pops out in the surroundings, like a trap favorable to me. He is about to touch her, and then boom, he gets punched by the one and only Ju-won, and he says, don't touch my comrade. You drain water crab. He scratches his head like, what the heck, you again, you should have ran away. And then he mentions, you lost earlier, so why would you come back again? He says, who knows, but on my way here, I planned how I'm gonna rough you up. And our boy really seems serious, and he starts to truly power up. We then see some sort of futuristic facility, and of course we see Haste holding her katana. She says they say they infiltrated Union, but I don't know if they're doing well. She then notices a worker there, and she says, what is it? And the worker says, and it's a robot, I don't think you'll be able to train a day. And then she says, perhaps Justice used it. The inside is quite. And then Miss Haste literally just walks past as she has her purse or her bag along with her katana, completely ignoring the robot. She walks in and says, I really don't like a single thing about him. What did the likes of him do in the training room? But then we see it, completely obliterated, and of course, Haste is like, what the heck is going on and what happened in this room? We then see a picture of Ju-won smirking, and our boy really got way stronger. Of course, the Mudman says, you got a plan? What a joke. If somebody gives you advice, you should listen to it carefully. I told you your power doesn't work on me. He smiles saying, I don't know. Don't you have to see if that's true first? And then he is ready to spit at him, and he launches his little spitty muds, and this guy really is a freak. But I did not expect this, and Ju-won puts his hands in the ground and throws up some of the cement to block his attack. I thought he was going to do a serious table flip like Saitama. The Mudman says, rather than sloppily trying to dodge, that might be better, and he launches towards him. We then see his body covered, and then he smiles in his mud form asking, how will you stop this? As we see a literal web forming around him, and he seems to be surrounded in mud. The Mudman says, didn't you say you had a plan to beat me up? Or are you gonna stand there like an idiot? But then of course he says, how is it different from last time, huh? And then we see he puts his hand above his head and he starts to release his aura. Boom. All of the mud is gone, and then he begins to wind down his arm. And he says, I'll show you, as we see some of Justice's masks start to begin to form on his face as well as on his arms. We then see the city and the wall, and boom, it is literally crushed as the Mudman gets sent flying. He is on the ground, and of course our boy, Ju-won, is ready to attack again. He spits again and he blocks it. And then he is ready to punch him one more time, and he literally makes his body explode. He says, what the heck? As we see the damage, and the whole road is literally being pulverized by it. The madman says, how the heck is he so strong? And he keeps getting sent flying. He says, you'll keep regenerating, is that it? And let's see who will win. He mentions in his head, the mud even flew outside of my area and control, and he needs to end this quickly. He uses manifestation Mudstorm, and he is surrounded in mud like what he did to Yum Yum. Ju-won says, a Mudstorm, huh? He cannot believe that he can summon so much mud. He says, acting up just because of your strength. I'll bury you in the mud and suffocate you. And then we see Ju-won literally get sucked into the tornado, but then we see his arm get bigger and better, and the aura emanates from his body, and he punches the ground, and the mud literally disappears as we see the huge crater, and it is the aftermath of the attack. The Mudman is like, how the heck is he just a newbie hero? Did he just stop the mud with wind pressure? And just as he's looking back, he jumps right in front of him, and it is a jump scare. He smiles, saying, where do you think you're going, you piece of crap? The Mudman smiles, saying, okay, I lost. I can't do anything about you. But then he says, what can you do other than throwing me away? And then he says, you could hit me for 100 days straight, and it would be of no use. And Ju-won just smiles as he remembers Justice, and he says whether in my form when I can change into Justice or his real form, he could never use 100% of his power. And then he loads, or he seems to be loading up an attack, and he says, until now I can't control all the strength, but he can use all of his strength in one instant. He then gets a flashback towards a martial artist, and he says, someone like a martial arts fighter said this on the internet once. You don't always need to use your full strength. Focus it on your target in the moment you need it. Our boy really getting advice from the television. We then see he's winding up his punch, and he says, think of it like an explosion. He uses manifestation, magnum, and boom. Our boy just punched him so hard, and he says, I think that simply throwing you away is already good enough. And he lets out a big and wide smile. Our boy really is beginning to become super OP. We then are at another location, and we see Stiletto and Chrome walking. He asks Chrome, don't you have your guard up a little much? And she says, I need somebody I can trust to be otherwise. And then he says, I think you're right. Our relationship isn't one with enough trust to talk about this. And she says, wait, as she points towards a building. He says, what about it? And she mentions that building's the only one with electricity. He says, let's check it out. And they walk in, but then the door is of course literally chained up. And Stiletto just crushes it easily. We then enter, and it seems to be like some sort of office with a whiteboard. She wonders to herself, it all seems normal. Did they just not cut out the electricity here? And then Stiletto mentions, it seems this place has a literal separate generator. And so Chrome knows that this is getting way more suspicious than it already is. We see a huge steel door, and then of course it gets opened instantly because Chrome uses her shadows to cut the cement around it. And then she seems pretty shocked. We then see some sort of lab for experimentation with even tubes of monsters in it. And we see blood on tables, and this is pretty disturbing. She wonders if this is a research facility, as we see some papers there, and Stiletto says, this was an extremely unethical laboratory. He says a type of biological laboratory. Who would do something like this? And she looks at the computer and she realizes it is already turned on. We then see there is a password, and she says, as expected, it is password protected. I'll have to take care of the computer itself to Atrium, But then, of course, Stiletto just hops on it like he's hopping onto the mic to rap, and we see complete. He really just bypasses security. Chrome asks, how did you know the password? And he says, total of 53 test subjects and the majority of them died. And he keeps talking about the experiment, but then, of course, we see Chrome's shadows crush some of the table in front of him, and she says as she releases her shadows, I told you to answer me, how did you know the password? We then go back to Ju-won, and he looks at his fist saying, did I do it too loudly? Yeah dude, you definitely did guys. Do you see the aftermath? The whole road literally looks like it got excavated. He says it was my first time facing a guy like this, so he was a bit taken aback. He remembers Yum Yum, and then he checks up on her, and she is literally in the mud. And then she says, do you think you're doing a mud pack or something? He then says, as he gets a flashback to the monsters, it seems that there were many of those violent ragers, and they might have gotten swept and do something annoying. He picks up a walkie-talkie, and then he wonders if the muddy guy dropped it. It says, Hidoro, what the heck is all this commotion? And then he realizes that that muddy guy had somebody with him. He transforms into the muddy guy, and I guess his name's Hidoro. And then he says, just trying to take care of those hero brats. And the guy in the walkie-talkie says, I see it's the same here. A man and a woman went inside the lab. And of course, Ju-won is shocked when he says, bring down the whole building with the bomb set up in there. He says, a man and a woman, it has to be Chrome and Stiletto. And then he responds, building, are you saying right now? That's a bit difficult for me. And then he gets caught in the act, and then the guy on the walkie-talkie says, you're not Hidoro, are you? He says, wait, hey, and then he thinks to himself as he's shaking, if there are more violent ragers and even guys like Hidoro, then those two are in danger as he reverts back. We go back to Chrome and Stiletto, and she says, if you can't explain it to me right now, but then Stiletto loads up some of his bones around his hand and jumps past Chrome and punches something. She asks, what the heck are you doing? But then he mentions it seems there's someone else here beside us, as we see some sort of green thing around his hand, and we see his bones start to go away and crumbling. He wonders, what the heck just hit me? And then we see somebody's hand with some sort of snake ring, and it seems that he was letting all of that seep through the door. And then we see Chrome and Stiletto, and they are literally shocked because the building was crashing down now. Some of the debris falls near to Chrome, as we see Stiletto about to get literally pounded down by the rocks, and it seems like he did, and we even see blood. And Chrome yells out to Stiletto. We see some sort of mysterious guy, and he says, I wondered who it was, so it was you, huh, Chrome? And this guy seems very dangerous, and he starts to ponder, I definitely heard you were dispatched to the Union. And then she says, heard, as she launches her attacks from behind him. And she asks him, what else did you hear? You should tell me as well. But then his green power just unleashes like some sort of virus, and it pushes away the shadows. And then he says, what meaning would that have? After all, you're going to die here. And he seems very cocky, and there seems to be a cross under his left eye. And I know he's going to be a big problem to Chrome, as we see her here, and she seems to be kind of nervous. Hey guys, welcome to the secret ending. Thank you guys so much for reaching it till the end. Make sure to comment down hero if you made it this far, and let me know down below who your favorite character of the series is. Make sure to subscribe for more awesome recaps like this, and I'll see you guys in the next recap.